We are buying you out. 15 cents on the dollar. Take it, or we will dilute you to absolutely nothing." The cold words came directly from Garrett Vance, the man who had once called himself my partner, my friend, and the person who had shaken my hand in a cramped garage apartment years ago, promising we would build something revolutionary together. Now he sat across a polished mahogany conference table in an office we had furnished together, flanked by our third partner, Tristan Forbes. Both of them wore matching expressions of calculated corporate cruelty. "A charity case," Tristan added, leaning back in his leather chair with practiced disdain. "That is what you have always been, Devin. We carried you this far out of sheer loyalty. But this company needs real leadership now, not dead weight with a sympathy stake." The blue folder they had slid across the table contained a buyout agreement for $600,000. For my 40% stake in Synapse Medical, the biotechnology company I had co-founded and built on technology I had personally developed. $600,000 for shares that both of them knew were worth tens of millions of dollars. The conference room felt completely airless. Outside, the San Francisco skyline stretched toward the bay, a beautiful view we had toasted with cheap champagne when we first signed the lease on this office. That felt like another lifetime. Another version of these two people who now stared at me as if I were merely a problem to be managed and discarded. The transition from peers to adversaries had happened so gradually that I had missed the signs, blinded by my focus on the science. Now, looking at their expensive suits and cold eyes, I realized the partnership had been dead for a long time. They saw a technician to be swept aside. I saw the culmination of my life's work. What they did not know, what their arrogance, their expensive lawyers, and their newly inflated egos could not conceive, was that the patent underlying every single dollar of Synapse Medical's valuation was not in the company's name. It was in mine, solely, legally, and irrevocably mine. And they were about to learn exactly what that meant. But before the revelation that changed everything, the story behind it needs proper context. My name is Devin Carter, and at 31 years old, I had already learned that intelligence and opportunity do not always arrive in the same package. My mother raised 3 children on a respiratory therapist's salary after my father decided family life was not compatible with his other interests. We did not go hungry, but we understood math in a way comfortable people never do. We knew the calculation of whether we could afford both the field trip fee and new shoes, whether the heat stayed at 65 or 68 degrees, and whether the slightly cheaper grocery store was worth the bus fare to get there. Mom never complained. She worked her 12-hour shifts, sometimes coming home at 3 in the morning with exhausted eyes, but always offering a warm smile. She helped us with homework, read to us, and treated every person with the same respect, whether they were surgeons or janitors. She would say that everyone is carrying something heavy, and kindness costs nothing. That shaped how I moved through the world, not with bitterness about what I did not have, but with a deep awareness of what others might be experiencing. Empathy is not about pity, it is about recognition, seeing people clearly, understanding their motivations, and reading the room. That skill turned out to be useful in ways I had never anticipated. I put myself through the University of California, Berkeley on scholarships, student loans, and a rotation of part-time jobs that kept my sleep schedule perpetually chaotic. I cleaned test tubes in chemistry labs, tutored struggling freshmen in physics, and worked late-night security shifts in the campus library. I remember drinking black coffee at 2 in the morning, staring at chemical formulas until they blurred, knowing that my entire future depended on passing those exams. I graduated with degrees in biomedical engineering and material science, then landed in a research position at a medical device company developing next-generation prosthetics. The work was fascinating, but the corporate environment was suffocating. Every minor innovation required 17 approval layers. Every experiment needed justification in triplicate. If I showed my manager a working prototype of a responsive prosthetic sensor, he would tell me it was not on the product roadmap for the next 5 years and that we did not have the budget to explore it. The gap between what we could do and what we were allowed to try felt like working with handcuffs on. By 27, I had started side projects in my evenings and weekends. I had been exploring adaptive neural interface materials, substances that could respond to electrical impulses from nerve tissue, potentially creating prosthetics with genuine sensory feedback. This meant devices that could feel, that could integrate with the body's own actual nervous system. The science was years ahead of anything in commercial development, and I was doing it in a one-bedroom apartment with equipment I had built from salvaged components and student-grade materials, purchased on a budget that would have made my corporate colleagues laugh. The kitchen counter was my workbench, and the hum of an old oscilloscope was my lullaby. That is where Garrett Vance found me. Garrett had the pedigree I lacked: a Stanford Master of Business Administration, venture capital connections, and family money that provided both investment capital and social access. He had been researching the prosthetics market, looking for emerging technologies worth building a company around. When a mutual acquaintance mentioned my work, he had shown up at my apartment on a Tuesday evening, wearing expensive jeans and a button-down shirt, looking around my cramped lab setup with an expression of intense curiosity. "You are really doing neural interface research here?" he had asked, picking up one of my prototype sensors. "This is graduate-level stuff. Why are you not at a university lab?" "University labs move slow and publish everything," I had replied. "I am not ready to publish. I am ready to build something real." That had sparked his interest. Over the next 3 hours, I walked him through my research, the conductive polymer composites I had developed, the signal processing algorithms that could interpret nerve impulses, and the theoretical framework for creating genuine sensory integration. Garrett listened with an intensity that felt validating. Finally, someone understood the magnitude of what this could become. "This could be worth hundreds of millions of dollars," he said as he was leaving. "But you cannot develop it alone. You need infrastructure, funding, and regulatory expertise. You need a company." "I need to maintain control of my research," I countered. "I have seen what happens when corporations swallow innovations and bury them in development hell." "What if you were the corporation?" he asked. "Co-founder, significant equity stake, decision-making authority. I bring the business infrastructure and funding connections. You bring the technology that makes it all worth building." The idea was intoxicating. My research freed from both corporate bureaucracy and my apartment's limitations. Real resources, a real timeline, and a real impact. We spent the next month hammering out terms. Garrett wanted to bring in Tristan Forbes, his former roommate from Stanford, who had been working in medical device sales and understood the commercial side of the healthcare market. Tristan was polished, smooth-talking, and possessed a vast network of connections among hospital procurement administrators and distributors. The three of us would split the company. Garrett and Tristan would each hold 30%. I would hold 40% as the technical founder. It seemed fair. I had the core technology, while they had the business expertise and industry connections. The lawyers drew up partnership agreements, operating contracts, equity structures, and everything formal and proper, notarized and filed. What I had done separately, on advice from a law school friend named Julian Croft, who helped me pro bono, was file the core patents in my individual name before the partnership was officially formed. Julian had warned me that startup dynamics can change rapidly once major funding enters the picture. We were sitting on his worn-out sofa, drinking cheap beer, when he gave me the advice that saved me. "I have seen too many brilliant engineers get pushed out of their own startups once the venture capitalists come in with their fancy term sheets," Julian had said, looking over my schematics. "They will tell you it is standard practice to assign your patents to the company, but it is just a polite way of taking your baby away from you. Keep the patents in your own name, license them to the company instead." The neural interface materials, the signal processing innovations, and the integration protocols were all protected under patents, listing Devin Carter as the sole inventor. Synapse Medical would license the technology from me under an exclusive license with generous terms to support the company's growth. But it was a license, not ownership. Julian had explained it simply: your invention, your protection. The company can use it, build on it, and make money from it. But if anything happens to the partnership, you keep control of the core intellectual property. At the time, it felt like paranoid overcaution. Garrett and Tristan were my partners, my team. We were building something together, but I filed the patents anyway. The first 2 years of Synapse Medical turned out to be exactly what I had anticipated. We raised seed funding, then a Series A round that brought in $12 million in capital. We celebrated at a local diner, eating greasy burgers and talking late into the night about how we were going to change the medical world forever. We built out a proper lab, hired a small team of brilliant engineers and researchers, and started clinical trials for our first product, a prosthetic hand with genuine tactile sensation. The test results were extraordinary. Patients could feel texture, temperature, and pressure. A woman who had lost her hand in an industrial accident cried when she felt her daughter's face for the first time in 6 years. A veteran could handle eggs without breaking them, feel the weight of his son's baseball glove, and experience handshakes instead of just performing them. The media coverage was overwhelming. We received invitations for presentations, profiles in medical journals, and interest from major prosthetics manufacturers who wanted to license our technology. Our valuation climbed from $12 million to $40 million, and then to estimates approaching $200 million as we approached Food and Drug Administration approval. Garrett and Tristan were fielding acquisition offers monthly. My 40% stake, on paper, was worth $80 million. I moved out of my apartment into a modest house, paid off my student loans, and paid off my mother's mortgage. I started sleeping regular hours for the first time in years. The work remained extraordinary, and every breakthrough felt like science fiction becoming reality. Every clinical success reminded me why this mattered more than money or valuation. But my relationship with Garrett and Tristan started shifting. It began with small things initially. Conversations that stopped when I entered rooms, strategy meetings I was not included in, and hiring decisions made without my input, even for technical positions. Garrett started introducing me at investor meetings as our technical specialist rather than a co-founder. Tristan began framing decisions as the business side versus the research side, positioning my input as narrow expertise rather than leadership perspective. They started driving luxury cars and wearing custom suits, looking at me in my casual lab clothes with subtle amusement. I remember sitting in a pitch meeting with venture capital partners on Sand Hill Road, watching Garrett and Tristan throw around buzzwords like synergistic growth and scalable pipelines while the investors nodded. I tried to explain the scientific principles behind our latest polymer revision, but Garrett quickly interrupted me, guiding the conversation back to their financial slides. I was being packaged as the eccentric scientist in the background, a prop to validate the technology while they took full credit for the business. When I raised concerns, Garrett was smoothly dismissive. "You are overthinking it, Devin," he said. "Everyone knows you are essential to this company. But investors want to see business leadership, not lab coats. It is just optics." The rationalization was plausible enough that I accepted it. I stayed focused on the research, the clinical trials, and the actual work that mattered. Meanwhile, they were planning. The signs became impossible to ignore. After we closed our Series B funding round, we raised $40 million at a pre-money valuation of $160 million. My stake was now worth $80 million on paper, and theirs was $60 million each. That is when the organizational restructuring began. Garrett brought in a new chief financial officer, a sharp-edged woman named Victoria Thorne, who immediately started optimizing operational efficiencies. She created new approval workflows that routed through Garrett and Tristan, modified signature authorities that reduced my financial oversight, and restructured committees that diluted my voting power on key decisions. She even blocked my administrative access to the company's financial dashboards, claiming it was a security standard. The laboratory felt increasingly corporate and sterile, replaced with security badges and visitor logs. All of this was presented as professional maturation, the company growing up from a scrappy startup to a serious business. I pushed back on some of it, but the framing was always the same: standard corporate governance, investor expectations, and fiduciary responsibility. If I questioned it too hard, suddenly I was being defensive, territorial, and unable to scale with the company's growth. The real warning came from our head of engineering, a brilliant woman named Fiona Brooks, who had been with us from the early days. She caught me after a team meeting, keeping her voice carefully neutral. "Devin, I need to tell you something, but I need you to promise you will not reveal I told you." My stomach dropped. "What is going on?" "Garrett and Tristan have been meeting with Vanguard Healthcare," Fiona said. "Not about partnership or licensing, but about a complete acquisition. And the terms they are discussing are structured to minimize your payout." Vanguard Healthcare was one of the major players that had been circling us for months, with deep pockets and established distribution. "How would they minimize my payout?" I asked. "I own 40%. Fiona hesitated. "The structure they are proposing treats the patents as company assets. You would get your equity percentage of the company's sale, but the patent value would be calculated separately and allocated based on some formula Victoria developed. From what I overheard, it would reduce your effective payout by 60 or 70%. "The patents are not company assets," I said slowly. "They are licensed to the company. I own them individually." Her expression shifted to confused relief. "Then you are protected." "But Devin, they do not think you know that. I have heard Garrett refer to managing your expectations and addressing the technical founder problem. Whatever they are planning, it is not friendly." I spent the next week moving carefully. I confirmed with my attorney that the patents were properly filed and the licensing agreements were airtight. I reviewed every company document I could access, looking for angles I had missed. What I found was worse than I had imagined. They had been preparing a dilution strategy, issuing new shares under terms that would have reduced my stake from 40% to roughly 15%. The authorization was buried in corporate governance provisions I had signed years ago, language I had not fully understood at the time. They had also been developing a narrative. I found draft presentations on Garrett's accidentally shared cloud folder. These materials positioned me as technically brilliant but strategically limited, unable to scale with leadership demands, and a risk factor for acquisition negotiations. The framing was insidious. Devin is great at research but does not understand commercial realities. Devin is attached to the technology in ways that might complicate strategic pivots. Devin's equity stake is disproportionate to current contributions. It was death by 1,000 implications, building a case to push me out. The meeting was scheduled with 24 hours of notice. It was framed as an urgent strategic discussion with just the three founders. I knew before I walked in what was coming. Garrett and Tristan were waiting in the conference room, the buyout folder already on the table like a prop in a rehearsed scene. The offer was insulting, 15 cents on the dollar, framed as generosity. "The company is moving in new directions," Garrett said with practiced sympathy. "Your contributions have been valuable, but the leadership team needs different expertise now. This offer lets you exit with dignity and capital to pursue other interests." $600,000 for an $80 million stake, I said flatly. "You are calling that generous?" Tristan leaned forward, dropping the sympathetic pretense. "We are calling it realistic. That 80 million is paper value based on technology you developed on company time, with company resources as part of company operations. The actual value of your contribution, separate from the infrastructure Garrett and I built, is significantly lower." "A charity case," he added, the phrase clearly workshopped for maximum impact. The character assassination was almost impressive in its efficiency. They wanted to rewrite our entire history, erase my contributions, and reduce years of partnership to patronizing charity. Garrett slid the folder closer. "Sign today and we can make this clean. Refuse and we move forward with dilution and restructuring. Either way, your role here is ending. The only question is whether you leave with something or nothing." The rage that moved through me was not hot. It was ice cold and perfectly clear. 3 years. I had spent 3 years trusting these people, building alongside them, and believing in a shared purpose and mutual respect. And they had been planning to rob me the moment it became convenient. I pulled out my phone, opened my document folder, and placed it on the table between us. "Before I respond to your offer," I said quietly, "I want to make sure we are working from accurate information. You mentioned technology developed on company time with company resources. Let us clarify that." I pulled up the first patent. This is the core neural interface polymer composition. Patent filed 14 months before Synapse Medical was incorporated. Sole inventor Devin Carter. I pulled up the second. Signal processing algorithms for nerve impulse interpretation. Filed 11 months before incorporation. Sole inventor Devin Carter. I pulled up the third. Integration protocols for sensory feedback systems. Filed 8 months before incorporation. Sole inventor Devin Carter. I looked up at their faces. Garrett had gone pale. Tristan was staring at the screen as if it were a venomous snake. Every core patent underlying Synapse Medical's technology, I continued, is filed in my individual name. The company holds an exclusive license to use this technology, licensed from me under terms we negotiated when the partnership formed. Under corporate law, you both owe me a breach of fiduciary duty if you act in bad faith. By plotting to dilute my shares behind my back and misrepresenting patent ownership to potential buyers, you have committed a clear breach of the duty of loyalty. I took a deep breath, letting the weight of my next words sink in. Additionally, the licensing contract contains an express contractual royalty acceleration clause. If I am ever forced out of my management position or if my equity is diluted below 40%, the exclusive license automatically terminates, and Synapse Medical is obligated to pay a 6% royalty on all gross revenues from inception to date, plus a 10% annual penalty. This is a standard acceleration clause under United States intellectual property licensing standards. You assumed I signed a patent assignment, but you forgot to check the actual schedules of assets in our corporate ledger. Tristan found his voice. You cannot hold the company hostage like this. Those patents should be company property. You developed them for company purposes. I developed them in my apartment with my equipment before this company existed, I corrected. Then I licensed them to our partnership under favorable terms. Terms you are now violating by attempting to force me out. Under California law, partners owe each other the utmost duty of loyalty, and your attempt to freeze me out is a clear breach of fiduciary duty. We can litigate this, and my lawyers will seek punitive damages. Garrett was scanning his phone, presumably checking with his lawyers. His expression confirmed what I already knew. I was right. They were trapped, and the power dynamic had just inverted completely. The silence in the room stretched on for several minutes, broken only by the hum of the air conditioner. Garrett's hands were trembling slightly as he set his phone down. What do you want? Garrett asked finally, his voice barely a whisper. I want my 40% stake respected. I want equal partnership authority restored. I want Victoria Thorne and her dilution schemes gone by the end of the week. And I want both of you to understand that if you ever attempt something like this again, I will revoke the licensing terms and charge Synapse Medical market rate royalties retroactively from inception. The number I ran with my attorney is approximately $60 million. It will bankrupt Synapse Medical and destroy everything we built, but it is legally airtight and entirely within my rights. The next 3 weeks were professionally brutal. Garrett and Tristan scrambled to contain the damage. Victoria Thorne resigned quietly. The dilution plan was shelved, and the acquisition discussions with Vanguard Healthcare were put on indefinite hold. But the partnership was irretrievably broken. We could maintain professional civility in meetings, but the trust was gone. Every decision became a negotiation. Every discussion carried undertones of suspicion. Fiona Brooks was promoted to Chief Technology Officer, a position that should have existed from the beginning, and she became my ally in what was now effectively a cold war within our own company. But running a company in a state of internal conflict was unsustainable. The innovation that had been Synapse's heartbeat started suffering. Clinical trials continued, but new research slowed. I started exploring options. The patents were mine, the technology was proven, and I did not need Garrett or Tristan to continue advancing the work. What I needed was a different kind of partnership. I found them at Keystone Medical, a mid-sized medical device company with an excellent reputation and ethical leadership. Their chief executive officer, Raymond Hayes, had approached me months earlier about potential collaboration. At the time, I had declined, loyal to Synapse. Now I scheduled a different conversation. Raymond met me at a coffee shop in Palo Alto, far from both our offices. I heard there has been some turbulence at Synapse, Raymond said carefully. Industry gossip being what it is. My partners attempted to force me out for a fraction of my equity value, I replied. They did not realize I owned the patents. We have reached a stalemate, but the partnership is not salvageable. I have two options. Option 1, I leave Synapse, revoke their licensing terms, and license the patents to you. That bankrupts Synapse and frees me to work with a company that values genuine partnership. The nuclear option, Raymond observed. Effective, but destructive. I agree, I said. It would hurt our employees who did nothing wrong, delay technology that could help thousands of patients, and waste years of development work. Option 2. Keystone acquires Synapse, under terms that force Garrett and Tristan out, compensates me appropriately for both my equity and my patent value, and provides a leadership structure where the technology can continue developing. Keystone acquires Synapse. I stay on as Chief Technology Officer with significant equity in the combined company, and we scale this technology the way it deserves. Raymond was quiet for a long moment, clearly running calculations. Garrett and Tristan will fight that acquisition, he said. They control 60% of the voting shares. They control 60% of shares in a company that has no value without my patents, I corrected. I can make it very clear that any acquisition I do not approve triggers immediate licensing revocation. They can sell the company's desks and coffee machines, but the actual technology walks out with me. That is reality. The patents are mine. Raymond extended his hand. Let me talk to my board. If we can structure this right, I think there is a deal that works for everyone who deserves to benefit. The acquisition negotiation took 4 months. Keystone made an offer. $180 million for Synapse Medical, contingent on Devin Carter joining as Chief Technology Officer and transferring patent licenses to the merged entity. The structure was elegant. Shareholders would receive their percentage of $120 million. The additional $60 million would be paid directly to me as licensing transfer fees for the patents. Separate from the equity payout, my total compensation was $48 million for my equity stake, plus $60 million for the patent transfer, totaling $108 million. Garrett's payout was $36 million, and Tristan's was $36 million. They argued it was unfair, that equity should be equity, and that the patents should be company property. The board was unsympathetic. Keystone's offer was the only serious acquisition interest remaining, and no other buyer wanted to navigate the complexity of a patent dispute. Garrett tried one final manipulation. After everything we built together, you are really going to burn it down over ego? You tried to steal my life's work for $600,000, I replied quietly. You called me a charity case and dead weight. Don't lecture me about ego or partnership. Sign the papers or do not. But I am done pretending you deserve more consideration than you have ever shown me. They signed. The transaction closed 6 weeks later. Synapse Medical became a subsidiary of Keystone Medical. I joined their leadership team with both the resources and authority to continue advancing neural interface technology. Most of Synapse's employees, including Fiona and the core engineering team, came with me. Garrett and Tristan had their $36 million each, but their professional reputations carried permanent asterisks. The story of trying to cheat their co-founder followed them, and investors were cautious. 2 years after the acquisition, the work at Keystone has exceeded all my expectations. We received regulatory approval for our first-generation prosthetics, launched second-generation devices with expanded sensory capabilities, and started clinical trials on neural interface applications beyond prosthetics. The technology my apartment research sparked is reaching patients who have been waiting for exactly this breakthrough. My mother has retired comfortably, and I endowed a scholarship at Berkeley for first-generation college students in biomedical engineering. If there is wisdom to extract from this experience, it is not cynicism about partnership, but understanding that protection and generosity are not opposites. Filing patents in my own name was due diligence. Licensing them to the company under favorable terms was generosity. Maintaining leverage if that generosity was abused was wisdom. The people who will betray you rarely announce themselves. The defense is documentation, clear agreements, and understanding where actual power resides. Not to wield it cruelly, but to ensure fairness remains mutual.